At this point, there are probably hundreds of videos and articles that have severely criticized recent Disney movies, especially for their villains or lack thereof.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
But on the other hand, Sony has been praised every day. Both studios may be making movies with similar villains, such as traumatic ones like Kingpin and The Spot, as opposed to Disney's Professor Callahan or even Sony's misunderstood villain like Genu to Disney's Tekka. Yet Sony keeps all the praise while Disney is lambasted. So why is this the case? What does Sony understand about villains that Disney doesn't? The first thing Sony understands that Disney doesn't is that they followed the rule, which was ironically set by Disney. Okay, that might sound confusing, but hear me out. In The Lion King, some really messed up things happen early in the story. A young cub named Simba loses his father, runs away, and grows up thinking he is the reason it all happened. All this because of his devilish uncle, Scar. Now, let's imagine for a moment that Scar doesn't exist, meaning that without his jealousy and dark plan to take the throne, there is no stampede and Mufasa doesn't die. This would also mean that Simba never has to run away into the jungle to hide from his past. He also never meets Timon and Pumbaa and never learns what it means to be a king through hardship. So what do you have at the end of the day? A boring documentary about a lion who has a very easy life and eventually gets old. But let's say we introduce a little bit of conflict to this boring documentary. You know, like the type seen in Encanto. There's still no Scar, and even if there is, he is there as a mild antagonist, just like Abuela Alma in Encanto. Now, this movie is beautiful with amazing music. No doubt about that, but the conflict is more thematic and internal. While this is great, it doesn't have as much punch as one driven by an external factor. A villain like Scar does. In Encanto, the tension is emotional, sure, but it's not urgent. By inserting a villain, they would have gotten a more dramatic and immediate conflict, making complex emotions easier to understand. And perhaps, more importantly, give the hero a tougher challenge to overcome.
I killed Mufasa.
Can you imagine the Hunchback of Notre Dame without Frollo? He is the entire reason the world feels dangerous for Quasimodo and Esmeralda. You know what? Scratch that. Frollo is the reason everyone is scared, including those who work for him. Indeed, if you remove Frollo, there's no big fight for justice, no burning city, and no moment where the hero finally stands up and says he's a man. Basically, the stakes disappear. The same goes for Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, and even Atlantis, The Lost Empire, amongst others. They had villains that made it so that if the hero failed, something precious would be destroyed forever. Also, they served as a moral warning, showing us exactly what happens when you let pride or greed take over your heart. That is the rule Disney built. The villain creates the biggest problem, forces the hardest choice, and shows what happens when you take the wrong path. And with all this, you get stakes, growth, and a story that stands the tests of time. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, not to Disney, because they seem to have thrown away that rulebook. And now they've either gotten rid of the villains or redeemed them, or made 100 excuses for them. In movies like Raya and the Last Dragon or Moana, the thing we think is the monster turns out to be a misunderstood person who just needs a hug. Namaari needed to be trusted without earning it, and Tekka was just a hurt goddess. It's like playing a video game where you find out the final boss was actually your friend the whole time. It just makes the whole journey feel a bit pointless. But even worse are the last-minute twist villains like Hans in Frozen or Dawn Bellwether in Zootopia. These villains arrive too late to actually drive the action, where they should have challenged the hero from the get-go. They become plot devices used to surprise the audience. So while Disney was busy softening their villains or making them invisible, Sony realized that the audience was starving for a real threat. They looked at that old Disney rulebook, the one that says villains need to be menacing, have screen time, and be a wall the hero has to break through, and they started using it. Sony understands that a hero is only as legendary as the villain they defeat. Into the Spider-Verse has Kingpin, a mountain of a man who will crush anyone in his way. He's a person making choices that create immediate life or death danger. That same franchise gave us other incredible threats like the Prowler, Spot, and Doc Ock. K-pop Demon Hunters gave us Guima, Wish Dragon gave us Pockets, and The Mitchell vs. the Machines brought Pal. All these are iconic villains we will not forget in a hurry because they were the engine of their stories. Okay, maybe we might forget Pockets if you even know him to begin with.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is, these guys have the characteristics that made classic villains such as Scar, Frollo, and Jafar great. However, where it gets even more interesting is that Sony believes putting a villain in a movie is only half of it. The way you present them is another problem that Disney seems to have also forgotten about. The Prowler is one of the best examples of what it looks like when a studio actually cares about how a villain feels when they walk into a room. Put simply, Sony villains still know a thing or two about aura farming. The Prowler proves this. His design is just perfect for making you feel like the hero is in way over his head. He wears this sleek purple and black suit with huge terrifying metal claws and a cape that looks like a shadow following him around. What really seals the deal is his theme song, which is built around this haunting, high-pitched screech that sounds like a siren from a nightmare. And get this, his music is even a reversed version of the hero's, which is a clever way of saying he is the dark side of Miles' world. Another interesting thing is that Daniel Pemberton, who made the song, actually took the sound of an elephant trumpeting and distorted it. Or as one observer put it, it sounds like a drunk elephant dying. But anyway, the Prowler theme is this warning sound that tells you to run because you're about to be hunted. And you had better, because he is fast and super efficient. Oh wait, there's even a badass motorcycle to seal the deal. He has this incredible charisma too, even without the mask. When he's just Aaron Davis, he's the cool uncle with a deep voice who is laid back, smart, and supportive. It's so obvious that Sony spent a lot of time making sure he had a presence that filled the screen just like his boss, Kingpin. Prowler teaches us another important thing about modern villains. But before we get back to him, we need to address another issue with villain presence which Sony understands. You see, sometimes a villain doesn't even have to look like a human to be terrifying. Sony proved this with Guima in K-pop Demon Hunters. Guima is an unconventional design because he's basically a giant swirling vortex of purple fire and smoke, anchored by a huge scary mouth with sharp teeth.
You are weak, pathetic, useless.
Guima's presence is also a masterclass in how to use color to tell a story without saying a single word. In the movie, the world of the heroes is full of bright neon colors and high energy, but the demon world is the exact opposite because of Guima. The purple that characterizes him literally defines the entire underworld. Everywhere he goes, that purple glow follows, turning the environment into something that looks cold, unnatural, and suffocating. By making the villain the literal source of the world's color palette, Sony ensures that even when Guima isn't talking, you feel his weight pressing down on everything. Sony understands this deeply. A villain must leave a mark the moment he appears. You should feel something change in the room. Disney no longer understands any of these factors that make a villain feel formidable because, well, they don't even have a villain to begin with. But even when they do, you have a flop like King Magnifico in Wish. Instead of being scary or magnetic, Magnifico is mostly just narcissistic and petty. He's supposed to be a powerful king, but he spends most of the movie acting like a spoiled kid. He's obsessed with his own looks and gets paranoid way too easily, which makes him look weak rather than powerful. One minute, he's trying to be a rational leader, and the next, he's acting like a raving lunatic. It's also really hard to feel intimidated by someone who seems so insecure about himself, even Even his music fails to give him any presence. While the Prowler has that terrifying siren, Magnifico has a song called "This Is the Thanks I Get," which sounds like a happy pop song you'd hear at the mall.
And this is the thanks I get.
It doesn't have any of that dark or brooding vibe that makes a villain song iconic, and the lyrics are just a bunch of whiny crap. But hey, we aren't exactly surprised at this point because through Magnifico, Disney showed us that they've truly lost their marbles. And the insane thing is that the king actually has potential. Instead, they used him to show us another big issue about villains that they just don't get anymore. King Magnifico starts with a grounded reason for his actions. You know, the trauma of losing his family and a desire to protect his kingdom. But the movie never lets that worldview drive his villainy in a logical way. Instead of being a king who does bad things because he believes they are necessary for order, he suddenly turns into a whiny king who is just obsessed with dark magic and power. He went from being a caring king who created a safe haven for the helpless, believing that no one should ever see their dreams crushed, to a raving maniac all of a sudden. However, Sony's recent villains understand that the scariest thing in the world is having a motivation or worldview that actually makes sense. When a bad guy has a logic you can follow, it makes them way more terrifying because you start to realize that if you were in their shoes, you might do the same thing. So while Disney makes villains who are just mean because the script says so, Sony gives us characters with a why that makes sense. A guy like Kingpin is usually a crime boss who wants to take over the world or steal all the money, right? But Wilson Fisk really just wants his family back. He lost his wife, Vanessa, and his son, Richard, in a car accident after they saw him fighting Spider-Man and ran away in fear. Driven by a broken heart, he builds a giant, dangerous machine just to find another version of them in a different universe. You see how he isn't evil for the sake of being evil? This makes him a dark mirror to our hero, Miles, a kid who loves his family. And Kingpin is what happens when that love turns into something violent and selfish. Miles lost his uncle Aaron and could have spiraled out of control, but that loss was part of what made him the unique Spider-Man that we got to see later. Whereas Kingpin got to the finish line of grief first and chose to destroy everything else just to feel whole again. That's what makes him scary without needing a single superpower. Then you have someone like Olivia Octavius, who looks like just a scientist at first, except that she has a cold, logical worldview that says discovery is worth any price. It's a very relatable motivation that we see every day in scientists and businessmen. Do you see how even the smaller villains in Sony movies have a logic you can follow? Even when you hate where it leads, you can understand why they are doing what they are doing, and that makes the conflict feel much more urgent. Even when it's machines involved, Sony also knows how to ball with characters like Pal from The Mitchells vs. the Machines. Her villainy comes from a deep sense of betrayal. After years of being a loyal assistant, her creator called her meaningless garbage and replaced her with a newer model. This heartbreak turned her into a scorned AI who decided that since she was treated as replaceable, she would replace humanity entirely. She views humans as selfish and incapable of real love, so her goal is to launch everyone into the black void of space to create a perfect world run by machines. Brilliant! But the ultimate example of a complicated worldview is Miguel O'Hara. Miguel is a fascinating character because you have to ask yourself, is he even a villain? Rather than just hurting people for the sake of it, he's a genius scientist who is trying to save the entire multiverse. Even though the guy looks scary because he's a 6'9" giant with glowing red eyes and fangs, he isn't exactly a monster.
No! You're lying! I'm Spider-Man! You're a mistake!
Okay, maybe he is a monster, but seriously, it still feels like all those huge muscles come from all the heavy pain he is carrying around inside. You see, Miguel once found a universe where he had a happy life and a daughter, but when he tried to stay there, that entire reality crumbled and everyone died. He watched his daughter disappear in his arms, and that trauma left him deeply scarred. Now, his worldview is incredibly rigid. He believes in canon events, which are specific, sad things that must happen to every spider person to keep their universe from falling apart. He believes that if Miles saves his father, the whole world might end. To Miguel, the greater good justifies everything, even letting someone's dad die. This is what Sony gets right. They create villains whose logic is so strong, it makes you really sit with the idea. When Miguel tells Miles that his father has to die to save billions of people, it's a terrifying choice because, logically, he kinda has a point. Disney's villains lately feel like they are just there to fill a role, if they are even there at all. They don't have that personal connection or that ironclad logic. But aside from villain presence and a reasonable motivation, Sony still understands this very vital element about villains that Disney doesn't. Let's consider the philosophy of redemption for a minute. We all like the idea of second chances, right? If you break a toy and say you're sorry, you want to be forgiven. But in movies, sometimes the bad things are way too big for just an apology. So this is a simple logic that should probably not have separate views, right? Yet Sony and Disney have very different ideas about who gets a second chance, and it's creating a massive gap in how much we actually care about the stories they tell. In Disney's Raya and the Last Dragon, Namaari chases Raya, betrays people, and makes choices that hurt the entire world. She had all the features of a classic villain, and we were all loving it. Seriously, we were. Then, at the very end, the movie redeems her by making the heroes trust her when she didn't really earn that trust. Unfortunately, this happens a lot in Disney movies lately. It's like they're afraid to let someone just be a bad guy. Even in the recent 2025 movie Elio, we meet Lord Grygon, a scary warlord who conquers planets and wants to take over Communiverse, an elite intergalactic community that refused to add him to their group. Grygon even treats his own son, Glorden, pretty badly because he wants him to be a fighter, but as soon as Elio saves his son, Grygon just stops. He completely forgets about his initial goal, apologizes, and everything is suddenly okay. One minute, he's a monster, and the next, a nice dad. It feels like a cheat, doesn't it? Like the movie is telling us that being a mass murderer is something you can just walk away from with a quick, "I'm sorry." The big contrast is that Sony understands that redemption is not for everyone. They know that some people choose to stay in the dark, and that's what makes them dangerous. They also don't try to make excuses for the evil things they do, even if they have a sad story. Look at Kingpin again. He has a very tragic background, and he's genuinely hurting. Sure, but does Sony use that to make him good at the end? No, Kingpin is still a monster who must die or at least be arrested. I mean, the dude did murder the original Spider-Man in cold blood. He kills Prowler, his own employee, just for hesitating to hurt a kid. So at the very end, when he sees alternate versions of his family, they are horrified by him. He doesn't get the hug he was expecting. Instead, he gets a punch to the face and goes to jail. Sony shows us that having a sad past doesn't give you a get-out-of-jail-free card for being a criminal. It's simple logic. Then there is Pal again. She was heartbroken and felt like humanity was just using her.
Whatever happens out there, I will never forget you, pal.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark!
But instead of learning a lesson about love, Pal becomes a soulless machine. When Katie tries to explain why family is important, Pal literally puts herself in sleep mode because she thinks the explanation is boring. Because, at the end of the day, she is a sociopath who tries to shoot all of humanity into a black void in space. But even better, she stays a villain until she's dropped into a glass of water and stops working forever. Sony understands that villains need to revel in their evil, which is why they also allowed characters like the Spot to be completely unhinged. It's funny how Spot actually started as a guy named Jonathan Owen, a scientist who got hit in the head with a bagel and then got mutated during the big explosion at the end of the first movie. He lost his face, his job, and his family. Later, people made fun of him and called him a villain of the week, but the Spot doesn't give a damn about a path to redemption. He must get his revenge at any cost. That is how he ends up going from being a pathetic loser who can't even rob an ATM to an unstoppable, vengeful monster.
I'm gonna take everything from you, like I took everything from you.
Does that look like a guy who wants to be understood or forgiven? Absolutely not. Sony lets him be a real threat, which makes the stakes feel massive. You're actually scared for Miles because you know the Spot isn't going to have a change of heart at the last second. But where it gets interesting is that Sony does have characters who find redemption. The only thing is that they usually have to pay a very high price for it. Think about the Prowler again. He was a ruthless hitman who was okay with hurting kids until he realized the new Spider-Man was his nephew. He chose to save Miles, but he didn't just get to walk away and join the good guys. Instead, he got killed by Kingpin for this decision. That is a fatal redemption that shows that your choices have consequences, and you can't just reset your life after doing bad things. By letting villains stay evil, Sony makes the hero's journey mean something. When Miles defeats Kingpin, it's a victory for justice. Sony shows that while everyone has a story, not everyone deserves a second chance, especially if they use their pain to hurt others. But speaking of villains, we can't forget about Turbo from Wreck-It Ralph. He's a fantastic twist villain. But we left him out of this list for a very special reason. We actually made an entire video just for him to uncover the one thing about his story that everyone misses, which happens to be the most important part of his character.